Sometimes the monsters we fear are the only ones standing between us and something far worse. The fluorescent lights of Salem General's parking garage flickered like dying stars as Ilara Chen fumbled for her car keys, exhaustion weighing down every step after another 14-hour shift watching people say goodbye. Her grandmother's latest medical bills crinkled in her coat pocket, numbers that made her stomach twist with familiar dread. That's when she saw him. A tall figure in an expensive coat collapsed against her Honda, blood seeping through fabric that looked older than it should, his pale skin almost luminous under the harsh lights. "Please," he whispered, his voice carrying an accent that seemed to drift through time itself. "They're coming." Before she could ask who, the stairwell doors exploded open. Dark figures poured into the garage, moving too fast, too fluid, their eyes burning with an impossible golden fire. Without thinking, Ilara yanked open her trunk. "Get in, now." As Lucian Draven folded his impossibly tall frame into her tiny car, she caught sight of scars that looked like they'd been carved by claws, and teeth that were just a little too sharp. Her hands shook as she slammed the trunk closed, her rational mind screaming that she'd just hidden a stranger who might be exactly what those hunters claimed he was. But what if the real question wasn't whether monsters exist, but whether the right monster might be the only thing that can save us all? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The man's weight settled against her passenger seat with surprising heaviness, his breath coming in shallow gasps that fogged the car's interior. Elena's hands trembled as she reversed out of the alley, forcing herself to drive with deliberate calm while her heart hammered against her ribs. In her rearview mirror, the tactical team emerged from the shadows like hunting dogs, realizing their prey had vanished. "Drive," he whispered, his accent carrying traces of old European aristocracy. "Away from the square. They'll expect us to head for the main roads." Elena found herself obeying without question, turning down a maze of side streets that wound through Prague's old quarter. The logical part of her mind screamed warnings. She'd just picked up a bleeding stranger being hunted by armed men. She should drive straight to a police station. Instead, she navigated deeper into the labyrinthine network of medieval lanes where tourists rarely ventured after dark. "Who are they?" she asked, stealing glances at her passenger. Up close, his features seemed carved from marble, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, skin so pale it appeared almost translucent. But it was his eyes that held her captive, dark as winter nights, ancient in a way that didn't match his apparent age. "People who believe the world has no place for things like me." His voice carried bone-deep weariness. "You shouldn't have helped. They'll remember your car." Elena's laugh came out bitter. "This rust bucket? Half of Prague drives a Skoda this old. Besides, I'm nobody. Trust me, I've perfected the art of being invisible." She meant it. 22 years of moving between foster homes had taught her to blend into backgrounds, to become the kind of person others looked through rather than at. Her current life reflected that same practiced anonymity, a studio apartment in Vinoredi's cheapest building, night shifts that kept her apart from normal human interaction, a carefully constructed existence that required something approaching shock. "You felt it too." "I don't know what I felt." But even as she said it, Elena knew she was lying. The visions had the crystalline clarity of memory, more real than her own childhood recollections. "Look, you're bleeding badly. I should take you to a hospital." "No hospitals. They'll find me there within the hour." His eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. "What's your name?" "Elena. Elena Novak." The admission felt more intimate than it should have. "And you are?" "Dmitri." He seemed to weigh whether to say more. "Dmitri Corvinus." The name resonated through her bones like a struck bell. Elena gripped the steering wheel harder, fighting another wave of impossible recognition. She'd never met this man before tonight, yet every instinct screamed otherwise. The rational explanation was that she was having some kind of breakdown, stress from working 3 jobs, exhaustion from years of barely scraping by. But rationality felt thin as paper against the weight of what she'd experienced when they touched. "I have a place," she heard herself saying. "Small, but it's clean. No one will think to look there." Dimitri's eyes narrowed. "Why would you risk that? You don't know me." Elena stared through the windshield at Prague's rain-washed streets, ancient architecture looming like sleeping giants in the darkness. Why was she risking it? Every survival instinct she'd developed warned against bringing a bleeding stranger home. But underneath that fear ran a current of certainty she couldn't explain or ignore. "Maybe I don't know you," she said finally. "But I know those men wanted to hurt you. And I know—" She paused, struggling with words for something that defied language. "I know I couldn't live with myself if I let that happen." Dimitri studied her profile in the dim light. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of wonder. 23 Koruni Street, 3rd floor, apartment 3B. Elena's blood turned to ice. She'd never told him her address. Elena slammed on the brakes, her rusted Skoda lurching to a stop beneath a flickering streetlight. The engine's death rattle seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. "How do you know where I live?" Her voice came out steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. Years of foster care had taught her to recognize predators, and every alarm bell in her head was screaming. Dimitri's pale face had gone ashen, his dark eyes wide with something that looked like his own brand of shock. I don't know." His aristocratic composure cracked. The words came from nowhere, like remembering something I'd forgotten. Elena's hand found the door handle. One pull and she could be running down the street, leaving this beautiful, dangerous stranger to bleed out in her passenger seat. It would be the smart choice, the safe choice. Everything about her life had been built on safe choices, keeping her head down, asking for nothing, expecting less. But those fragments of memory that weren't hers still pulsed behind her eyes, stone corridors lit by torches, the weight of heavy fabric against her skin. And always, always, those same eyes looking at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever whispered. "Show me your hands," she said, instead of running. "What?" "Your hands. If you're some kind of stalker who's been watching me, you'd have calluses from manual labor like everyone else in this city who's not born rich." She gestured at his expensive coat. "But if you're actually whatever those tactical teams were hunting—" Dimitri extended his hands without protest. Even in the dim streetlight, Elena could see they were unmarked by honest work, pale, long-fingered, with the kind of manicured perfection that spoke of centuries rather than decades of avoiding manual labor. "You're not human," she said. It should have sounded insane. Instead, it felt like stating an obvious fact. "No." His voice carried the weight of confession. "I'm not." Elena stared at him, waiting for fear to overwhelm her. It didn't come. Instead, she felt the same bone-deep certainty that had made her hide him in the first place, as if some part of her had been waiting her entire life for this revelation. "What are you?" "Something that shouldn't exist in your world anymore." Dimitri's eyes found hers. "Something that's brought you nothing but death across the centuries." The words hit her like a physical blow. Those impossible memories flashed again. But this time she saw the endings. Fire consuming everything she loved. Cold steel sliding between her ribs. The light fading from her vision as those dark eyes filled with anguish above her. "I've died before," she whispered. "Multiple times. And you were there, Elena. That's why my address felt familiar to you. Because you've been there before, in other lives. Other versions of me." Her laugh came out shaky. "God, I'm either having a complete psychotic break, or my life just became infinitely more complicated." Dimitri reached toward her, then stopped himself. "You should walk away, right now. Get out of this car and never look back." Elena studied his face, the sharp aristocratic features, the ancient pain in his eyes, the way he held himself like nobility even while bleeding. Then she thought about her real life, the one she'd built from nothing after aging out of foster care. Her studio apartment with its single window overlooking a brick wall. 3 jobs that barely covered rent and groceries. Night cleaning at the Novi Smichov office complex, weekend shifts at a tourist cafe that paid under the table, and occasional translation work that reminded her why she'd loved languages before poverty made everything about survival. No friends, because trust was a luxury she'd never been able to afford. No family, because the system had made sure she understood from childhood that people left. No romantic relationships, because letting someone close meant giving them the power to destroy the fragile stability she'd built. It was a half-life, safe, controlled, and utterly empty. What if I don't want to walk away? The question surprised her with its honesty. What if this terrible, impossible thing is still better than going back to pretending I'm alive when I'm just surviving? Dimitri's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something that might have been hope. You don't understand what you're saying. The people hunting me won't hesitate to kill you. People have been trying to break me my whole life. Elena put the car back in gear. They haven't succeeded yet. She pulled away from the curb, heading toward Venority through streets that suddenly felt charged with possibility. In her peripheral vision, she saw Dimitri settle back against the seat, his breathing evening out as if her decision had granted him some kind of peace. 23 Koruni Street, she said softly. 3rd floor, apartment 3B. Let's see what other memories surface when we get there. The building's entrance light had burned out weeks ago, leaving Elena to navigate by memory through the cramped lobby that smelled of boiled cabbage and decades of neglect. Dimitri moved beside her with surprising grace for someone who'd been bleeding in her car minutes earlier, his footsteps silent on the worn linoleum. 3rd floor, Elena whispered, though she wasn't sure why she was whispering. Mrs. Svoboda in 2A was deaf, and the university student in 1 degree Celsius never came home before dawn. The building held the particular silence of people who worked odd hours and minded their own business, one reason she'd chosen it. As they climbed the narrow staircase, Elena's hand found the railing, and another flash hit her. Not the grand stone corridors from before, but wooden stairs worn smooth by centuries of use. Servants' quarters, a hidden passage, and the same desperate need to reach safety before... Elena. Dimitri's voice cut through the vision. Are you all right? She blinked, realizing she'd stopped climbing. Just remembered something that wasn't mine again. Her keys felt strange in her hand as she approached 3B, as if she'd performed this exact motion countless times before. Does this get easier? The memories? I don't know. You're the first... He paused. The first to remember while still alive. The words sent ice through her veins, but Elena forced herself to focus on the simple mechanics of unlocking her door. Key in lock, turn, push, the familiar creak of hinges that needed oil. Her studio apartment revealed itself in all its modest reality. A single room with a kitchenette, a narrow bed, a desk salvaged from a university dumpster. The brick wall outside her window reflected nothing back but darkness. It was exactly what it had always been, a place to exist, not live. But as Dimitri stepped inside, something shifted. The space felt different, charged with an energy that made the air itself seem to vibrate. He moved through her small domain as if navigating a map burned into memory, his eyes tracking details with unsettling familiarity. In accented English that belonged to another century. They'll kill you eventually. I won't let them hurt the others, Dimitri replied, but his voice was younger, less weary. Not while I can still fight. And what about me? What am I supposed to do when you don't come back? The desperation in her own voice was heartbreaking. I can't lose you again. You won't. I promise you won't. Elena jerked back to the present, gasping. Dimitri was watching her with an expression of infinite sadness. I broke that promise, he said quietly. I break it every time. How many times? Elena's voice came out hoarse. How many lives have we done this? I've stopped counting after the first dozen. The casual way he said it hit her like a physical blow. A dozen lives. A dozen times she'd loved him, lost him, died because of him. And here she was, about to do it again. Elena stood abruptly, pacing to her single window. Outside, Prague slept under a blanket of rain and ancient secrets. Somewhere in those medieval streets, armed hunters searched for the man sitting in her apartment, men who would kill her without hesitation if they found him here. The smart choice was obvious. Bandage him up, give him whatever money she had, and send him back into the night. Return to her safe, empty existence of night shifts and careful isolation. Pretend this had been a fever dream brought on by too much stress and too little sleep. But as she stared at her reflection in the dark window, Elena saw something she hadn't noticed before. Her eyes held depths that belonged to more than 22 years of life, as if all those other women, those other versions of herself, were looking back from behind her face. "The people hunting you," she said without turning around. "What do they want?" "To end the cycle, permanently." Elena's blood chilled. "And if they succeed, then you die for the last time. No more reincarnation. No more chances." Dimitri's reflection appeared behind hers in the window. "Which is why you need to walk away while you still can." But even as he said it, Elena knew it was already too late. The choice had been made the moment she'd opened her car door in that rain-soaked alley. Maybe it had been made centuries ago. She turned to face him, decision crystallizing with startling clarity. "Tell me everything." Dimitri's face transformed at her words, relief and terror warring in those ancient eyes. "Elena, if I tell you everything, there's no going back. Once you know the truth, you become part of this whether you want to be or not. I'm already part of it." Elena gestured at the space between them, electric with recognition neither could deny. "The question is whether I face it blind or informed." But even as she said it, doubt crept through her resolve like ice water through cracked stone. What was she doing? 24 hours ago, her biggest problem had been whether she could afford both rent and groceries this month. Now she was demanding cosmic truths from a bleeding stranger who claimed to have loved her across centuries. "You're afraid," Dimitri observed, his supernatural senses apparently extending to reading human emotions. "Good. Fear might keep you alive longer than love has." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. "Tell me about the others, the other versions of me. How did I die? Elena." "No, I need to know. If I'm walking into the same trap over and over, I need to understand the pattern." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "How many different ways have I already died for you?" Dimitri's composure finally cracked. He ran a hand through his dark hair, leaving it disheveled in a way that made him look more human and somehow more dangerous. "Fire, mostly. They've burned you as a witch more times than I can bear to remember. Twice they made it look like accidents, a carriage overturning, a building collapse. Once," his voice broke, "once they made me watch as they cut your throat." Elena's hand flew instinctively to her neck. For a moment, she could swear she felt the phantom ache of a blade sliding across skin. "And you let this happen? Over and over. You let me find you, knowing how it ends." "I tried staying away." The words exploded from him with centuries of anguish. "Do you think I haven't tried? I've left cities, left countries, tried to disappear completely. But somehow, you always find me, or I find you, as if the universe itself conspires to bring us together just to..." His movements careful as if approaching a spooked animal. "You should walk out that door and never look back. Find someone normal, someone who won't bring armed killers to your doorstep. Someone human, you mean?" "Yes." Elena's laugh came out bitter. "You know what's funny? I've spent my entire life trying to be normal, trying to blend in, stay safe, avoid attention. And where has it gotten me?" She gestured at her pathetic studio apartment. "I'm 22 years old and I have nothing. No family, no friends, no future beyond working myself to death in jobs that barely pay rent. You have your life. No, I have existence. There's a difference." Elena found herself moving closer to him despite every survival instinct screaming warnings. "At least with you I feel alive. Terrified, but alive." "Feeling alive and staying alive are mutually exclusive when it comes to me," Dimitri said quietly. I've watched you die 13 times, Elena. 13 different faces, 13 different names, but always the same soul looking at me with love as the light fades from your eyes. The number hit her like a physical blow. 13. 13 times she'd loved this man. 13 times he'd failed to save her. What makes you think this time will be different? She whispered. I don't. His honesty was brutal. If anything, this time feels worse. The hunters have evolved, organized. They call themselves the Covenant now, and they've spent decades developing weapons specifically designed to kill things like me. More importantly, they've found a way to track soul energy. They won't just kill you, they'll destroy the part of you that reincarnates. Elena sank onto her bed, overwhelmed. So my choices are live a safe, empty life alone, or love you and die permanently. Those are your choices. She stared at her hands, ordinary hands that had apparently pressed bandages to his wounds across centuries. In her peripheral vision, she could see Dmitri watching her with the stillness of a predator, but also with something desperately vulnerable in his ancient eyes. The smart choice is obvious, she said finally. Yes. Elena looked up at him, memorizing the sharp planes of his face, the way moonlight from her window cast shadows that emphasized his inhuman beauty. Tomorrow, she could return to her carefully constructed invisibility. Pretend this night had been a fever dream. Go back to existing instead of living. Tell me about the first time, she heard herself saying. Tell me how we met. Dmitri's expression softened, centuries of pain giving way to something almost tender. He moved to the window, gazing out at the rain-soaked streets as if seeing through time itself. London, 1642, he began, his voice taking on the cadence of someone accustomed to telling stories that spanned lifetimes. You were Lady Catherine Pembroke then, daughter of a minor nobleman who'd backed the wrong side in the Civil War. Your family's estate had been seized, your father executed as a traitor. You were hiding in the servants' quarters of your own ancestral home, disguised as a scullery maid. Elena felt something shift inside her chest, recognition blooming like a flower opening to sunlight. I remember stone floors, always cold, even in summer. Pembroke Manor had been commandeered by Parliament forces. I was there on business, the kind of business that required discretion and darkness. His lips curved in a bitter smile. Even then, I was cleaning up problems for those who preferred to keep their hands clean. But when I saw you carrying water buckets up those narrow stairs, wearing a rough wool dress that couldn't hide your bearing, you knew what I was immediately. Nobility recognizes nobility, even in rags. But it was more than that. Dmitri turned from the window, his ancient eyes finding hers. You looked at me without fear. Not because you didn't sense the danger, but because you'd already faced worse. Loss had carved strength into you that made you... He paused, searching for words. Luminous. Even in hiding, even in despair, you shined. Elena's breath caught as memories that weren't quite hers surfaced. The weight of homespun fabric against skin accustomed to silk. Hands raw from lye soap and hard work. And always, always, the careful dance of pretending to be invisible while maintaining enough pride to survive. How did we fall in love? Slowly, dangerously. Dmitri's voice dropped to almost a whisper. You were supposed to be temporary shelter, a safe house where I could wait out some particularly persistent hunters. But you had this way of asking questions that cut straight to truth. You saw through every carefully constructed lie I'd told myself about what I was, what I did. And you saw through my disguise. More than that. You were the first person in 2 centuries who looked at me and saw someone worth saving instead of something to be destroyed. He moved closer, and Elena could see the exact moment past and present converged in his memory. You made me remember what it felt like to be human. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel the weight of that first love story settling over her like a familiar cloak in consistency. How long did we have? 6 months. The happiest of my very long life. Dmitri's voice cracked slightly. We had plans. I was going to take you away from England, away from the war and the hunters. We talked about Venice, about starting over where no one knew our names. But they found us. They found you. The distinction carried centuries of self-recrimination. I'd grown careless, too comfortable. The Pembroke name still carried enough weight to attract attention, and someone remembered that the youngest daughter had never been properly accounted for. When they realized who you were harboring, Elena didn't need him to finish. She could see it playing out with terrible clarity. Torches in the darkness, armed men, accusations of witchcraft and treason, the convenient excuse to eliminate both a political inconvenience and a vampire's human weakness. They burned the manor with me inside it, she said softly. It wasn't a question. The phantom smell of smoke suddenly filled her nostrils. Dmitri closed his eyes, pain etching deep lines around them. I tried to reach you, nearly died in the flames myself, but they'd planned well, surrounded the building with blessed silver, contained the fire just enough to ensure you couldn't escape, but the entire structure would eventually collapse. And you had to watch. I had to listen. They made sure I could hear. He stopped, unable or unwilling to continue. Elena stood slowly, her decision crystallizing with each heartbeat. She crossed the small space between them until she could have reached out and touched his face. That was almost 400 years ago. We've had 12 more chances since then, and you've lost me every single time. Yes, the logical thing would be to walk away. Save us both the heartbreak. Yes, he whispered. Elena met his eyes, seeing not just Dmitri but centuries of love stories cut short. Centuries of desperate hope crushed by reality. She thought of her safe, empty life, the night shifts and solitary meals, the careful walls she'd built around her heart. Then she thought of how alive she'd felt in the last few hours, how completely herself, despite the impossible circumstances. I've never made a logical choice in my life, she said finally. I'm not starting now. She reached for his hand, and when their fingers touched, the last of her carefully constructed defenses crumbled away. Tell me everything. All of it. I'm not walking away. Dmitri's fingers tightened around hers, and for a moment Elena thought she saw something like hope flicker across his features before pragmatism reasserted itself. You say that now, he murmured, but you don't understand what everything means. The supernatural world has rules, Elena, ancient laws that govern what I am, what my enemies are, and what you've just become by choosing to stand with me. Elena settled back onto the couch, pulling him down beside her. Then teach me. Dmitri was quiet for a long moment, studying their joined hands as if memorizing the sight. When he spoke again, his voice had taken on the measured tone of someone delivering a briefing on matters of life and death. The Covenant isn't just a group of human hunters. They're an ancient order, founded by the Church in the 13th century but evolved far beyond religious zealotry. They have resources, technology, and most dangerously, they have vampires working for them. Vampires hunt other vampires. When it serves their interests, yes. The Covenant promises them legitimacy, founded by the Church in the 13th century but evolved far beyond religious zealotry. They have resources, technology, and most dangerously, they have vampires working for them. Vampires hunt other vampires. When it serves their interests, yes. The Covenant promises them legitimacy, protection from other hunters, even synthetic blood so they don't have to feed from humans. His jaw tightened. In exchange, they help eliminate vampires like me, those they consider uncontrolled elements. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with her apartment's poor heating. What makes you uncontrolled? I refuse to register with them. I won't accept their oversight or their restrictions, and I protect others who feel the same way. Dmitri's eyes found hers. There's a community of supernatural beings in Prague, Elena. Vampires, yes, but also witches, shapeshifters, even a few beings whose true nature I'm still not certain of. The Covenant wants them catalogued, monitored, controlled. I've spent the last century helping them stay free. Before Elena could respond, a sound from outside made them both freeze. Footsteps on wet cobblestones, moving with the deliberate precision of people conducting a search. Dmitri was at the window instantly, his movements too quick to track. 3 of them, he whispered, peering carefully through a gap in the curtains. Human, but armed with silver core ammunition and UV floodlights. Elena's heart hammered as reality crashed back over her. This wasn't just an abstract discussion about supernatural politics. There were people outside right now who would kill them both without hesitation. Can they track you here? Not directly, but they're sweeping the area systematically. They know I was wounded, know I couldn't have gone far. Dmitri moved away from the window, his expression grim. We have perhaps 10 minutes before they reach this building. What do we do? But before Dmitri could answer, Elena's phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. The hunters are close. Stairwell in 30 seconds. Trust me. M. Elena stared at the message in confusion. I don't know anyone who... A soft knock at her door interrupted her, followed by a woman's voice speaking in accented English. Dmitri, it's Mira. We need to move. Now. Dmitri's entire posture changed, tension giving way to something like relief. She's a friend, one of the community I mentioned. Elena found herself face to face with a woman who looked to be in her 30s, with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes that held depth similar to Dmitri's. But where his presence felt like controlled danger, hers radiated a calm competence that immediately put Elena at ease. So you're this incarnation, Mira said, studying Elena with frank curiosity. You look different this time, stronger. This incarnation? Elena echoed weakly. I've met you before. Twice, actually. Vienna in 1823, and again in Budapest in 1934. Mira's smile was tinged with sadness. You probably don't remember me, but I was there when... She glanced at Dmitri. Well, the past is past. The casual confirmation that her past lives were real, that this stranger had known other versions of herself, left Elena reeling. But the sound of footsteps in the building's main entrance snapped her back to the immediate crisis. How do we get out? Dmitri asked. Roof access through the maintenance ladder in the back hallway. I've got a car waiting 2 blocks away. Mira looked at Elena. Do you have anything essential here? Anything you can't leave behind? Elena glanced around her tiny apartment, her entire life contained in maybe 40 square meters of modest possessions. There was nothing here that couldn't be replaced, nothing that truly mattered. The realization was both liberating and deeply sad. No, she said quietly. There's nothing I can't leave behind. As they prepared to flee into the Prague night, Elena caught sight of her reflection one last time in the dark window. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the careful, invisible person who had left for work that morning. This woman's eyes held determination instead of resignation, purpose instead of mere survival. The old Elena was already gone. Whatever came next, she would face it with eyes wide open. The maintenance ladder rungs were slick with condensation and decades of grime. Elena's hands shook as she climbed, acutely aware that one slip would send her crashing down 3 flights of concrete stairwell. Above her, Dmitri moved with inhuman grace despite his injuries, while Mira brought up the rear, occasionally pausing to listen for pursuit. There, Mira whispered as they reached the roof access. 2 minutes ahead of schedule. Elena emerged into the Prague night, rain immediately soaking through her sweater. The medieval city spread out below them in a patchwork of amber streetlights and shadow, beautiful and suddenly treacherous. Somewhere in those winding streets, armed hunters were systematically closing in. The safe house is across the river, Mira explained, leading them across treacherous wet tiles toward the adjacent building. But we need to talk strategy before we move you there. The Covenant isn't going to give up because you escaped one sweep. They reached a gap between buildings, maybe 6 feet across, with a 4-story drop to the alley below. Elena's stomach lurched as Dmitri prepared to jump. Elena can't make that distance, he said, already calculating alternatives. Actually, Mira smiled grimly, she won't need to. She pulled out what looked like a modified flare gun. Zipline anchor, courtesy of the Resistance. Resistance. The word hit Elena like a revelation. This wasn't just Dmitri protecting a few supernatural beings. There was an entire underground network fighting the Covenant. She was witnessing a war she'd never known existed, fought in the shadows of ordinary human life. As Mira secured the line, Elena found herself studying the other woman more closely. The casual competence, the way she'd known Elena's past incarnations. This wasn't someone who merely helped occasionally. This was a soldier. "How long have you been fighting them?" Elena asked. "Personally, about 60 years. Mira tested the line's stability, though the resistance itself goes back centuries. We've just gotten better at coordinating lately." 60 years? Elena did the math, studying Mira's apparent age. "But you look not quite human myself," Mira confirmed with a rueful smile. "Which bloodline? We age slower, live longer. Long enough to remember what the world was like before the Covenant started their registration campaigns." Elena felt another piece of her understanding shift. She'd been thinking in terms of vampires versus humans, but the reality was far more complex. Multiple species, multiple agendas, and she was caught in the middle with no roadmap for navigation. "Ready?" Dmitri appeared beside her with the zip-line harness. His hands were gentle beside her with the zip-line harness. His hands were gentle but impersonal as he secured the straps around her waist and shoulders. "Trust me." Those two words carried weight beyond the immediate situation. Trust him with this crossing, yes, but also with her life, her future, her very soul. Elena met his eyes and nodded. The ride across was terrifying and exhilarating, wind and rain whipping her face while Prague blurred past below. When Dmitri caught her on the other side, pulling her against his chest to absorb the impact, she felt momentarily safe despite everything. "We need to move," Mira urged, already packing the equipment. "Ground team will reach your building any minute." They descended through an abandoned hotel, navigating debris-strewn corridors by flashlight. Elena's mind raced as she tried to process the magnitude of what she'd committed to. This wasn't just about her relationship with Dmitri anymore. She was now actively fleeing from an international organization with resources that apparently included both human agents and supernatural collaborators. "The car's just ahead," Mira whispered, leading them toward a service exit. "But Elena, we need to discuss something before we reach the safe house." They paused in the hotel's loading dock. Outside, Elena could see a nondescript sedan waiting with its engine running. "The others are going to want to meet you," Mira continued. Words already spreading that Dimitri's found his reincarnated love again. Some see that as hope, proof that some bonds transcend even death. Others, she glanced meaningfully at Dmitri. Others remember how badly things went the last few times. "Meaning what?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Meaning some of them think you're a liability," Dmitri said bluntly. "Every incarnation has ended the same way, with hunters using you to get to me, and me making catastrophic decisions trying to save you." The weight of 13 failed love stories pressed down on Elena. 13 times she'd been someone's weakness, someone's fatal flaw. The thought should have sent her running, but instead she felt a strange sense of responsibility. All those other versions of herself had died without understanding what they were truly part of. "This time could be different. Then we'll have to prove them wrong," she said quietly. Mira and Dmitri exchanged a look loaded with centuries of experience and skepticism. "The safe house isn't just sanctuary," Mira warned, as they prepared to make their final dash to the car. "It's also going to be your trial." Elena's stomach dropped as Mira's words settled over her. "My trial?" "Not malicious," Mira said quickly, though her expression remained grave, "but necessary. The Resistance has protocols when someone new enters our circle, especially someone whose past incarnations have gotten people killed," Elena finished. The rain drummed against the loading dock's metal roof, each drop echoing like an accusation. "How many?" Dimitri's silence was answer enough. "The car," Mira urged, but Elena didn't move. "How many?" she repeated, her voice stronger now. If she was going to face judgment for crimes committed by other versions of herself, she needed to understand the full weight of what she carried. Prague, 1942, Dmitri said finally, his voice hollow. You were a resistance fighter, the human resistance, fighting Nazis. I tried to help, broke cover to protect you. 3 vampires and 7 humans died when the Covenant used the chaos to raid our safe house. Elena felt the first crack in her newfound resolve. 7 people, dead because some other version of herself had made Dmitri lose his carefully maintained control. Budapest, 1934, Mira continued quietly. You were a scholar researching folklore, brilliant, determined to prove supernatural beings existed. When the Covenant captured you, they tortured you for information about Dmitri's network. You held out for 6 days before I broke and told them everything, Elena whispered. She could feel it somehow, the phantom memory of pain beyond endurance, the devastating moment when love became betrayal. 5 safe houses burned that night, Dmitri said. 12 people died, including a family with children. The loading dock seemed to tilt around Elena. She gripped the doorframe, trying to process the magnitude of what her very existence meant. Not just her own repeated deaths, but the deaths of innocents caught in the crossfire of her doomed love story. There have been others, Mira said gently. Not all ending in betrayal, but all ending in Dmitri making choices that prioritized saving you over protecting the community. The pattern is consistent. Then why? Elena looked between them, genuinely confused. Why bring me to your people at all? Why not just... She gestured helplessly. Because running isn't an option this time, Dmitri said. The Covenant has evolved. They're not just hunting me anymore. They're systematically dismantling the entire supernatural underground. Every safe house, every ally, every connection I've built over 4 centuries. They won't stop until they've eliminated all resistance. And they're using our connection to do it, Elena realized. They know you'll come for me. They know I'll make mistakes trying to protect you, Dmitri corrected. The question is whether we can break the pattern before... A sharp whistle from the car interrupted him. Their driver was gesturing urgently. Time had run the longest 20 yards of Elena's life. Every shadow could hide a sniper. Every sound could herald capture. When they finally tumbled into the back seat, Elena found herself pressed between Dmitri and Mira, hyper-aware of how her presence had just made both of them targets. Elena. Mira's voice was gentle but firm as the car pulled into Prague's labyrinthine streets. The trial isn't about punishment, it's about understanding. The resistance needs to know if this incarnation is different, if you were strong enough to break the cycle instead of perpetuating it. How do I prove that? By facing your greatest fear, Dmitri said quietly. Every incarnation has had one, the thing that ultimately broke them when the Covenant found their weakness. Elena thought about her life up until 12 hours ago. What had she been most afraid of? Being truly alone, perhaps, or being so forgettable that she'd leave no mark on the world. But those fears seemed trivial now compared to the weight of lives depending on her choices. What if I don't know what my greatest fear is? You will, Mira said grimly. The Resistance has ways of clarifying such things. Ancient magic combined with modern psychology. It's not pleasant, but it's thorough. The car wound through narrow streets Elena didn't recognize, past medieval buildings that seemed to lean in conspiratorially. She caught glimpses of people in doorways, too still, too watchful. The Resistance's network, she realized. All of them now potentially compromised because she existed. There's something else, Dmitri said, his voice careful. The trial will show us not just your fears, but your memories. All of them. Every incarnation, every death, every moment I failed to save you. Elena's breath caught. You'll see them too? We all will. The Resistance needs to understand exactly how the pattern works if we're going to break it. Dmitri's hand found hers in the darkness. You'll experience dying 13 different ways, Elena, and you'll feel every moment of my failure to protect you. The car pulled to a stop outside a building that looked like an abandoned warehouse. Elena could see figures moving in the shadows. the resistance members who would judge whether she was salvation or catastrophe. "Last chance," Mira said softly. "Walk away now, and we'll find another solution." Elena looked at the building where her greatest fears would be laid bare, where she'd relive 13 deaths and face the full weight of loving someone whose devotion had killed dozens of innocents. She opened the car door. The warehouse's interior defied its derelict exterior. Ancient symbols carved into concrete walls pulsed with faint luminescence, while modern equipment hummed quietly in the shadows. Elena counted at least 15 people, arranged in a loose circle, around what looked like an interrogation chair fitted with both leather restraints and gleaming metal apparatus she couldn't identify. "The memory extractor," Mira explained, noting Elena's stare. "It will pull every incarnation to the surface simultaneously. We'll see your deaths, but more importantly, we'll see the choices that led to them." A tall man with prematurely white hair stepped forward. "I'm Victor, Resistance Council leader. Before we begin, you should know, 3 of our safe houses have been compromised since midnight. The Covenant is moving faster than ever before." Elena felt the weight of accusation in his words. "Because of me. Because of what you represent," Victor corrected. "The question is whether you're worth the cost we're already paying." Dmitri moved protectively closer. "Victor, no." Elena stepped away from Dmitri's sheltering presence. "He's right to question me. I need to know too." She approached the chair, studying its ominous array of wires and sensors. "What happens if I fail your trial?" Victor exchanged glances with the other council members. "Then we use a memory wipe to erase your knowledge of us, relocate you somewhere safe, and Dmitri accepts exile from Prague." "Exile?" Elena spun toward Dmitri. "You never mentioned—" "Because I won't accept it," Dmitri said firmly. "This city is my responsibility. These people are my responsibility. And I'm your weakness," Elena finished, the brutal truth settling over her like a shroud. "I'm the thing that makes you choose wrong every single time." She sat in the chair before anyone could respond, holding her arms out for the restraints. "Then let's see if this time can be different." The first strap around her wrist felt like a countdown beginning. As Victor secured the neural crown to her temples, Elena caught sight of the resistance members' faces, hope warring with skepticism, desperation masked as clinical detachment. "Beginning memory extraction," someone announced. The pain hit like lightning behind her eyes. Then Elena was drowning in lifetimes of sensation. London, 1847. Victoria, in a blue silk gown, screaming as silver bullets tore through Dmitri's chest, while she gave hunters the location of the Underground's headquarters to save him. Paris, 1923. Isabelle. The artist, tortured for 3 days before revealing which cafe served as a meeting point, her betrayal leading to a massacre. Moscow, 1889. Katerina the Revolutionary, choosing to save Dmitri's life instead of warning the vampire families about the coming raid. Each death crashed over Elena with perfect clarity. She felt Victoria's desperation, Isabel's agony, Katerina's impossible choice. But underneath the surface memories, a pattern emerged that made her blood run cold. Every incarnation had been offered the same deal by their captors: betray Dmitri's network, and he would be spared. Kill dozens to save one. Every incarnation had eventually accepted. "Stop!" Elena gasped, but the memories kept flooding through her. Berlin, 1961. Hannah the nurse, watching Dmitri's eyes fill with devastation as her torture-induced confession led hunters straight to a family of vampire refugees. Rome, 1705. Lucia the merchant's daughter, her final words an apology as Dmitri cradled her dying body amid the burning wreckage of everything he'd built to protect her. 13 iterations of the same fundamental betrayal. Love corrupted into weakness, protection becoming destruction. Elena felt her sanity fraying under the weight of accumulated guilt spanning centuries. "Please," she sobbed, pulling against the restraints. "I can't." Then the worst memory surfaced. Prague, 1942. The incarnation Dmitri had mentioned earlier. Elena experienced it from the inside, the Nazi interrogation, the impossible choice between betraying the resistance or watching Dmitri burn alive in a specially constructed UV chamber. But this memory was different. This version of herself had found a third option. Marie had lied. She'd given the Nazis false information while secretly warning Dmitri's people through a contact in the human resistance. She'd saved both networks by sacrificing only herself, drinking poison hidden in her clothes before her captors realized they'd been deceived. Elena felt the poison burning through Marie's system as she smiled at her interrogator's rage. Felt Dmitri's anguish when he found her body, but also felt Marie's fierce satisfaction. She'd finally broken the pattern. The memory extraction ended abruptly, leaving Elena gasping in the sudden silence. Impossible, Victor breathed. The 1942 incarnation, she didn't betray anyone. Then why did people die? Elena asked weakly. Dmitri's face was ashen. Because I went mad with grief. I hunted down every Nazi in Prague connected to your death, broke every protocol, exposed our entire network seeking revenge. The devastating truth crystallized. Even when her incarnation made the right choice, Dmitri's love still destroyed everything. Victor's voice was gentle but final. I'm sorry, Elena. The pattern isn't about your strength. It's about his weakness. As long as you exist, he'll never choose the greater good over saving you. Elena met Dmitri's eyes across the warehouse, seeing her own heartbreak reflected there. They were each other's damnation. And love couldn't change that. The warehouse fell silent, except for the steady drip of water from somewhere in the darkness. Elena remained strapped to the chair, her body trembling from the aftershocks of 13 lifetimes of memory, while the truth settled over everyone like a funeral shroud. There has to be another way, Dmitri said finally, his voice breaking the oppressive quiet. He stepped toward her, but Victor raised a hand to stop him. Don't you see? Victor's voice carried 4 centuries of accumulated wisdom and weariness. Even now, faced with absolute proof of what your love costs, you're reaching for her. You can't help yourself. Elena watched Dmitri's face cycle through denial, rage, and finally, devastating acceptance. She saw the exact moment he understood that Victor was right, that even in this warehouse, surrounded by evidence of their mutual destruction, his first instinct was still to comfort her rather than confront the larger truth. But as Elena stared at Dmitri's stricken expression, something else crystallized in her mind. Something the memory extraction had revealed that no one else had caught. You're all missing it, she said quietly. The resistance members turned toward her, surprise flickering across their faces. Missing what? Victor asked. Elena's powerless, he said finally. Every incarnation's deepest terror was being helpless to save the people they loved. Exactly. Elena felt the final pieces clicking into place. But I'm not powerless anymore. I know what's coming. I know the pattern. And most importantly, I know that Marie proved it's possible to win. Mira stepped forward, her expression troubled. Even if that's true, Elena, you're talking about walking into a trap. The Covenant has had centuries to perfect their methods. Then we'll have to be smarter than they are, Elena said. She looked at Dmitri, seeing the war between hope and terror playing out in his features. But it can't work if you're trying to save me. It only works if you trust me to save myself. The warehouse fell silent again as everyone grappled with what she was suggesting. Elena could feel the weight of history pressing down on them. 13 failed attempts, countless deaths, centuries of the same tragic pattern repeating. But underneath that weight, she felt something else. The fierce satisfaction she'd experienced through Marie's memories. The knowledge that the pattern could be broken, that love didn't have to equal destruction. We need time to think, Victor said finally. This changes everything. Elena nodded, understanding that she'd just shifted the entire foundation of their assumptions. The trial wasn't over, it had just begun, but for the first time in 13 lifetimes, she believed they might actually win. The hours that followed felt suspended outside of time. Elena had been released from the memory extraction chair, but the weight of 13 lifetimes still pressed against her consciousness like phantom limbs. She sat cross-legged on a makeshift cot in a corner of the warehouse, watching the Resistance Council huddle in urgent discussion while Dmitri paced the perimeter like a caged wolf. "You should eat something," Mira said, settling beside her with a steaming cup of coffee and what looked like military rations. The extraction takes a physical toll. Elena accepted the coffee gratefully, letting the warmth seep through her fingers.
How long do they usually debate?
Depends on how much they're arguing. Mira glanced toward the council cluster, where Victor's gestures had grown increasingly animated. Some of them think your plan is brilliant. Others think it's suicide with extra steps. And Dmitri thinks if he paces long enough, he'll wear a hole in the floor and solve everything through the power of anxiety. Despite everything, Elena found herself smiling. You've known him a long time. Long enough to see him make the same mistakes over and over. Mira's expression grew serious, but also long enough to know when he's changing. The way he's fighting his protective instincts right now, that's new. Elena watched Dmitri's restless movement, noting how he deliberately stayed away from her corner of the warehouse. Every few circuits, his eyes would find hers across the space, and she could see the internal war playing out. Love battling logic. Centuries of pattern fighting against the possibility of something different. "The council's reached a decision," Victor announced, his voice cutting through the automatic breaking of will and spirit. But she also remembered Marie's fierce determination, the satisfaction of choosing sacrifice over betrayal. "What about communication?" she asked. "If the plan depends on coordination, how do I signal you?" Mira held up a device that looked like a cross between a hearing aid and a piece of jewelry. Modified tracker with a panic function. It's designed to look like a family heirloom, something personal they'd let you keep. And if they don't? Elena took the device, feeling its surprising weight. "If they strip me of everything? Then you rely on backup communication." Victor pulled out a small vial of dark liquid. Vampire blood, specifically Dmitri's blood. A single drop on your tongue creates a temporary psychic link, not strong enough for full telepathy, but sufficient for basic emotional communication. Elena looked at Dmitri, seeing the horror on his face. "You're asking her to drink vampire blood without knowing the full consequences," he said, "of will and spirit." But she also remembered Marie's fierce determination, the satisfaction of choosing sacrifice over betrayal. "What about communication?" she asked. "If the plan depends on coordination, how do I signal you?" Mira held up a device that looked like a cross between a hearing aid and a piece of jewelry. Modified tracker with a panic function. It's designed to look like a family heirloom, something personal they'd let you keep. And if they don't? Elena took the device, feeling its surprising weight. "If they strip me of everything? Then you rely on backup communication." Victor pulled out a small vial of dark liquid. Vampire blood, specifically Dmitri's blood. A single drop on your tongue creates a temporary psychic link, not strong enough for full telepathy, but sufficient for basic emotional communication. Elena looked at Dmitri, seeing the horror on his face. "You're asking her to drink vampire blood without knowing the full consequences," he said. It could save her life," Victor interrupted. "And more importantly, it could save everyone else's lives. The temporary link would let you know if she's in immediate danger without compromising your ability to make strategic decisions." The warehouse fell quiet as Elena weighed her options. She could feel the Resistance's collective breath being held, waiting for her answer. This wasn't just about breaking her personal pattern anymore. It was about proving that love could be a source of strength rather than weakness. "When do we start?" Elena asked. Victor smiled grimly. "Tomorrow night. The Covenant won't be expecting us to move this quickly." Elena nodded, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. For the first time in 13 lifetimes, she was going to face her captors with knowledge, preparation, and allies. The pattern was about to break. Next 18 hours passed in a blur of preparation that felt both meticulous and surreal. Elena found herself memorizing floor plans of the abandoned church, practicing responses to interrogation scenarios, and learning to activate the hidden tracker with subtle finger movements that would look like nervous fidgeting. But it was the smaller moments that stayed with her. The way Dimitri's hands shook as he carefully measured drops of his blood into the vial. How Victor's ancient eyes softened when he taught her breathing techniques to resist pain. The quiet solidarity of resistance members sharing stories about their own close calls with the Covenant. "You don't have to do this," Dimitri said for the 10th time as dawn approached. They were alone in a corner of the warehouse, the vial of his blood sitting between them like a dark promise. "Yes, I do." Elena picked up the vial, watching the liquid catch the warehouse's dim lighting. Not just because of the pattern, but because it's right. How many people has the Covenant killed while hunting us? How many more will die if we keep running? Dimitri's jaw tightened. And if I can't let you go when the moment comes? If 400 years of instinct overwhelms everything we've planned? Elena met his eyes, seeing the vulnerability beneath his fear. Then you'll prove Victor right about us being each other's weakness. But I don't think that's who we are anymore. She uncorked a vial and let a single drop of his blood touch her tongue before she could second-guess herself. The taste was copper and iron and something darker, like earth after rain, like wine aged in crypts. For a moment, nothing happened. Then awareness bloomed between them like a bridge made of starlight. Elena gasped as Dimitri's emotions washed over her, 4 centuries of grief and guilt, the devastating weight of repeated loss, but underneath it all, a love so profound it felt like drowning in warm honey, and flowing back through the connection, she felt him experience her own feelings, determination sharp as a blade, fear transmuted into purpose, and a love that had survived 13 deaths. "I can feel your heartbeat," Dimitri whispered, wonder replacing the anguish in his voice. Elena nodded, testing the connection. When she focused, she could sense his presence like a warm pulse at the edge of her consciousness. "It's beautiful," she said, "and terrifying. The link will strengthen over the next few hours," Victor's voice interrupted. They turned to 48 hours. "No permanent changes to your humanity, Elena." Elena stood, surprised by how steady she felt. The blood connection had settled into something like background music, present but not overwhelming. "I'm ready." "No," Mira said gently. "You're committed. There's a difference. Ready implies you're prepared for what's coming. Committed means you're going anyway." The distinction hit Elena like a physical blow. She thought about the torture memories she'd absorbed, the systematic breaking of will that awaited her. She wasn't prepared for that pain. No one could be. But she was prepared to endure it. As they gathered their equipment, Elena felt the weight of the moment settling over the warehouse. This wasn't just another resistance operation. It was an attempt to rewrite centuries of pattern, to prove that love could be transformed from weakness into strength. "There's something else you need to know," Victor said as they prepared to leave. "The Covenant isn't just hunting Dimitri anymore. Our intelligence suggests they're planning something larger, a coordinated strike against supernatural communities across Europe." Elena felt Dimitri's shock through their blood link. "When?" "Soon. Which means if this plan fails, it won't just be about your personal cycle repeating. It'll be about the destruction of everything we've built." The magnitude of what they were attempting suddenly crystallized. Elena wasn't just breaking her own pattern, she was potentially preventing a supernatural genocide. The thought should have been paralyzing, but instead, it sharpened her resolve. As they moved toward the warehouse exit, Elena caught sight of her reflection in a broken mirror propped against the wall. She looked different, not physically, but in some essential way. The frightened girl who'd hidden a bleeding stranger in her car was gone, replaced by someone who understood that love sometimes meant choosing the greater good over personal happiness. "Elena." Dimitri's voice stopped her at the threshold. She turned, seeing him silhouetted against the warehouse's dim interior. Through their connection, she felt the words he couldn't say, 13 lifetimes of love distilled into a single moment of absolute faith. "Come back to me," he said simply. Elena smiled, feeling the truth settle into her bones like armor. "I will. But this time, I'm coming back as myself, not as your salvation or your weakness. Just Elena." As they stepped into Prague's pre-dawn streets, Elena felt the city's ancient stones beneath her feet and understood that she was about to either vindicate 4 centuries of tragedy or add her own chapter to it. The final confrontation was no longer looming. It was here. The abandoned church of St. Bartholomew crouched between modern apartment buildings like a gothic ghost, its broken spires reaching toward Prague's slate-grey sky. Elena felt the weight of 13 lifetimes pressing against her ribs as she approached the side entrance, each step echoing with the footfalls of women who had walked into similar traps across the centuries. Through the blood link, she sensed Dimitri's position 3 blocks away, a steady pulse of controlled anxiety that matched her own heartbeat. The connection had strengthened over the past hours, becoming something like shared breath, shared courage. When she focused, she could feel his absolute faith in her threading through the fear. "Trust yourself," his voice whispered across the psychic bridge. "Trust what you've learned." Elena touched the tracker hidden beneath her shirt collar, disguised as her grandmother's pendant, the one piece of her foster care past that had actually held meaning. The irony wasn't lost on her that something from her rootless childhood might now anchor her survival. The church's interior was a study in deliberate decay. Broken pews had been arranged to suggest recent use, candle stubs positioned to imply clandestine meetings. Someone had even scattered old newspapers and coffee cups to sell the illusion of a functioning safe house. The Covenant's attention to detail was impressive and terrifying. Elena had been alone for exactly 7 minutes when they came. She heard them before she saw them. The whisper of footsteps moving with inhuman coordination, the subtle displacement of air that spoke of preternatural speed. 3 figures emerged from the shadows behind the altar, dressed in the dark tactical gear she remembered from that first night when they'd hunted Dimitri through Prague's medieval quarter. "Elena Novak," the center figure said, removing his helmet to reveal a face that could have been carved from marble, ageless, beautiful, and utterly cold. "We've been looking forward to meeting you." Elena forced herself to remain seated in the broken pew, though every instinct screamed at her to run. "I think you have me confused with someone else." "Do we?" The vampire, because there was no doubt what he was, moved with that liquid grace she'd learned to recognize. 13 lifetimes of confusion would be quite remarkable. Her blood chilled, but Elena kept her expression neutral. The Resistance had prepared her for this. The Covenant knew about the reincarnation cycle, had been manipulating it for centuries. Acting surprised would only confirm. "Before you ask, I knew your first incarnation personally." Elena felt Dimitri's rage spike through their connection, so powerful it nearly buckled her knees. She sent back what steadiness she could, a reminder that this was exactly what they'd expected. "How nostalgic for you," she managed. "Oh, it is." Marcus gestured to his companions, who moved to flank Elena's pew with military precision. "Do you know what fascinates me most about your pattern? It's not the dying. Death is common enough. It's the hoping. Every single incarnation believes she'll be the one to break the cycle." Elena stood slowly, calculating distances to exits while appearing calm. "And yet, here I am again." "Here you are indeed." Marcus tilted his head, studying her with the intensity of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. "But this time feels different, doesn't it? This time you remember." The casual confirmation that they knew about the memory extraction sent ice through Elena's veins. How long had they been watching? How much of the Resistance's plan had been compromised? Through the blood link, she felt Dimitri's desperate urge to intervene, to storm the church and damn the consequences. Elena closed her eyes for a heartbeat and sent him everything she had, her love, her determination, her absolute faith that this could work. Not yet. She projected. Trust the plan. The memories must be overwhelming, Marcus continued conversationally. 13 deaths, each more tragic than the last. Tell me, which one haunts you most? Catherine's burning, Magdalena's drowning, or perhaps Marie's poisoning, so noble, so utterly pointless. Elena felt the careful control she'd built around the traumatic memories strain under his deliberate provocation. This was how they broke their victims, not just through physical torture, but by weaponizing their deepest fears and regrets. Marie's death wasn't pointless, Elena said quietly. She proved the pattern could be broken. Marcus laughed, the sound echoing off the church's crumbling walls. Is that what you tell yourself? My dear girl, Marie's sacrifice changed nothing. Dmitri still lost control, still slaughtered half of Prague's supernatural community in his grief. The only difference was that he mourned a saint instead of a sinner. The words hit like physical blows. But Elena forced herself to stand straighter. She thought about Marie's memories, not the pain and fear, but the fierce satisfaction of choosing love over survival. You're right, Elena said, surprising Marcus mid-gloat. She did die. They all died. But they loved him anyway, and that's not weakness. She met Marcus's ancient eyes without flinching. That's the one thing you've never understood. Marcus's expression shifted from amusement to something colder, more calculating. Understanding is irrelevant. Control is what matters. He nodded to his companions, and Elena felt the temperature in the church drop as their supernatural presence intensified. And you, my dear, are about to learn the difference. The attack came without warning. Elena dove behind the nearest pew as one of Marcus's companions, a woman with silver hair and predator's eyes, moved with inhuman speed. Splinters exploded where Elena's head had been a heartbeat before. Through the blood link, she felt Dmitri's surge of panic, his overwhelming need to reach her. Stay back, she projected desperately, even as she rolled to avoid another strike. Let me draw them out. But the plan was already fragmenting. The tracker at her throat felt suddenly heavy, useless. They weren't trying to capture her for interrogation. They were trying to kill her. Did you really think we'd repeat the same tired pattern? Marcus called out, his voice eerily calm as his companions systematically destroyed her cover. 13 times we've let Dmitri watch you die slowly, let his grief drive him to madness. This time, we're going to break him properly. Elena's mind raced as she scrambled between the broken pews. The Resistance's entire strategy had been based on the Covenant's historical behavior. Capture, interrogate, use as bait. But Marcus was right. Patterns could evolve. A hand closed around her ankle, yanking her from behind a stone pillar. Elena found herself face to face with the silver-haired vampire, whose grip was like iron shackles. Hello, Catherine's echo, the woman purred. I was there when the first you burned. Your screams were exquisite. Rage flooded Elena, not just her own, but the accumulated fury of 13 lifetimes of women who had died at these creatures' hands. Without thinking, she drove her thumb into the vampire's eye, using every dirty fighting trick the Resistance had taught her. The vampire shrieked and released her, black blood streaming down her pale face. Elena ran toward the altar, her mind calculating frantically. The church's layout, the positioning of the exits, the weight of the broken masonry around her, everything became a weapon, a tool, a possibility. Impressive, Marcus said, appearing in her path with supernatural speed. But ultimately pointless. His hand shot out, fingers closing around her throat. Elena felt her feet leave the ground, her airway constricting. Through the blood link, Dmitri's agony blazed like wildfire. She was dying, and he could feel every second of it. But something unexpected happened. Instead of weakening her, the shared pain sharpened Elena's focus. She could feel Dmitri's centuries of combat experience flowing through their connection, his tactical knowledge overlaying her desperation. Elena stopped struggling against Marcus's grip and instead drove her knee up with vicious precision. The vampire doubled over with a grunt of surprise, his hold loosening just enough for Elena to wrench free. You feel him, don't you? Marcus straightened, wiping blood from his mouth with something approaching respect. The blood link, how wonderfully intimate. I wonder, when I tear your heart out, will he feel it stop beating? The silver-haired vampire had recovered, her ruined eye already beginning to regenerate. The third Covenant member, silent until now, began circling Elena like a wolf, cutting off her escape routes. The trap was closing, and Elena realized with crystalline clarity that she was about to die, not as part of any grand plan, but because they had fundamentally misunderstood their enemy. Through the blood link, she felt Dimitri's restraint finally shatter. The church's main doors exploded inward with the force of a small earthquake. Ancient wood and iron scattered like confetti as Dimitri materialized in the doorway, his eyes blazing with an otherworldly light that turned the dim church bright as noon. "Get away from her," he snarled, his voice carrying harmonics that made the broken stained glass windows sing. Marcus smiled widely, revealing his fangs. "There he is, right on schedule." Elena felt the terrible realization crash over her. This had been the trap all along, not to capture her but to force Dimitri into the open when he was, too emotionally compromised to think clearly. The Covenant had evolved their strategy, but their goal remained the same: make Dimitri lose control, then destroy him when he was vulnerable. "It's a trap!" Elena shouted, but Dimitri was already moving. The collision between the two ancient vampires sent shockwaves through the church's foundation. Stone cracked, timber groaned, and Elena threw herself behind the altar as debris rained down around them. She could feel Dimitri's fury through their link. 400 years of grief and loss focused into pure destructive rage. He was magnificent and terrible, but Elena could also sense him slipping toward the same madness that had claimed him in previous cycles. The pattern wasn't just about her death, it was about his reaction to it, and this time, she was alive to change both. The battle between Dimitri and Marcus transformed the abandoned church into a war zone. Ancient stone columns cracked under the force of supernatural combat, and Elena pressed herself against the altar as centuries-old masonry rained down around her. Through their blood link, she felt every blow Dimitri landed, every surge of his killing rage, and she understood with devastating clarity that they were losing the real war, even as he dominated the physical one. This is what they want, she realized, watching Dimitri tear through Marcus's companions with inhuman brutality. They want him to become the monster. The silver-haired vampire's scream cut short as Dimitri ripped her head from her shoulders. Black blood painted the church walls like abstract art, and Elena felt his satisfaction spike through their connection. Primal, vicious, intoxicating. She could sense him slipping deeper into the berserker state that had claimed him in previous cycles, the careful control they'd built together dissolving under centuries of accumulated grief. "Yes," Marcus laughed even as he dodged Dimitri's claws by inches. Careful control they'd built together dissolving under centuries of accumulated grief. "Yes," Marcus laughed even as he dodged Dimitri's claws by inches. "Show her what you really are, old friend. Let her see why you've destroyed everything you've ever loved." Elena closed her eyes and reached through the blood link, pushing past Dimitri's rage to find the man beneath the monster. What she found there broke her heart. He was terrified, not of dying but of losing himself in front of her, of proving that Marcus was right about his nature. "I see you," she projected with everything she had. "Not the monster. You." For a heartbeat, Dimitri's assault faltered. He turned toward her, his eyes still blazing with otherworldly light, but his expression suddenly, devastatingly human. In that moment of connection, Elena saw their entire future spread out before her like a map written in starlight. She could feel the bloodlink's power, still growing stronger, still binding them closer together. Victor had said it would fade in 48 hours, but Elena knew with bone-deep certainty that was a lie. The connection was too pure, too perfect. It would take more than time to break what they'd forged, and that was the trap within the trap. The Covenant didn't just want Dimitri to lose control once. They wanted him bound to someone who would slowly, inevitably, drive him insane with shared mortality. Every emotion Elena felt would echo through him, Every pain, every fear, every moment of human fragility would become his burden. Over decades, it would destroy them both. Marcus was already moving, capitalizing on Dimitri's moment of distraction. His claws swept toward Dimitri's throat in an arc that would decapitate even an ancient vampire. Elena saw the strike coming through their link, felt Dimitri's shocked realization that he'd left himself open. Time crystallized. Elena understood, finally, what victory required. Not just her death, that had never been enough. It required her choice, the willing sacrifice of everything she'd gained, everything she'd fought for, everything that made their love possible. She had to break the blood link herself. Elena bit down on her own tongue, hard enough to draw blood, and spoke the words Victor had taught her, not for establishing the connection, but for severing it. The incantation felt like swallowing glass, each syllable tearing at the bond they'd built. Sanguine vinculum dissolvo, amor mane, ligament transit. The effect was immediate and devastating. The blood link snapped like an overstretched rope, sending psychic shockwaves through both of them. Elapsed behind the altar, feeling like half her soul had been ripped away. Through their severed connection, she sensed Dimitri's anguish, not just at losing her presence in his mind, but at understanding why she'd done it. Without the link to distract him, Dimitri moved like liquid death. Marcus's claws met empty air as Dimitri flowed around the strike and drove his hand through the other vampire's chest. Marcus looked down at the heart, now decorating Dimitri's fist with something approaching admiration. "Clever girl," he wheezed, black blood frothing at his lips. "But you've only postponed the inevitable. The pattern always completes itself." "Not this time," Elena said, rising from behind the altar on unsteady legs. She felt hollow, incomplete, but also strangely free. "This time, I choose." Marcus's ancient eyes found hers as his body began to crumble. "Choose what, little echo?" Elena looked at Dimitri, seeing him clearly for the first time without the blood link's influence, not as her destined love or her salvation, but as a man worth choosing, to love him without binding him, to break the pattern by refusing to complete it. As Marcus dissolved into ash and memories, Elena felt the weight of 13 lifetimes lifting from her shoulders. The victory was bitter and perfect. She had saved them both by giving up the very thing that made them whole. In the church's sudden silence, Elena met Dimitri's eyes across the rubble-strewn space. The blood link was gone, but something deeper remained, a choice made freely, without destiny's compulsion. They had won. The cost was everything they had built together. The silence in the ruined church felt heavier than the debris scattered across its floor. Elena remained by the altar, her legs unsteady as the full impact of what she'd done settled into her bones. Without the blood link's constant whisper of Dimitri's presence, the world felt muted, like stepping from a warm room into winter air. Dimitri stood motionless among the ashes that had been Marcus, his hand still extended from the killing blow. Black blood dripped from his fingers onto the broken stone, each drop echoing in the sudden quiet. When he finally looked at her, Elena saw her own devastation reflected in his dark eyes. Elena. Her name on his lips was barely a whisper, heavy with loss and understanding. He took a step toward her, then stopped, as if uncertain of his welcome. She wanted to run to him, to close the distance and pretend the severed link didn't matter. But the space between them felt vast now, filled with the phantom ache of their broken connection. Every breath reminded her of what was missing. His emotions no longer colored hers. His thoughts no longer brushed against her consciousness, like silk. "Are you hurt?" Dimitri asked, his voice carefully controlled. "No," Elena said, though it wasn't entirely true. The psychic wound left by severing the link throbbed with each heartbeat, a constant reminder of what she'd sacrificed. "Are you?" He flexed his fingers, studying the blood there as if it belonged to someone else. "Nothing that won't heal." The formal politeness between them was worse than any physical pain. They spoke like strangers, like the weeks of shared dreams and whispered confessions had never happened. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold in the church's draught. "The link," Dmitri said finally. "You broke it to save me. To save us both," Elena corrected. She forced herself to meet his eyes, to explain what he couldn't feel through their severed bond. It wasn't fading, was it? Victor lied about the 48 hours. The connection would have grown stronger, bound us tighter, until I went mad, Dmitri finished quietly. Yes, I realized it too, at the end. He moved closer, his footsteps crunching on broken glass. Your mortality, your pain, your fear, all of it flowing through me constantly. In a year, perhaps 2, it would have driven me to the same madness that claimed me before. Elena nodded, relieved he understood. And my mind couldn't have handled your memories indefinitely. The weight of 4 centuries would have broken me. She attempted a smile. We would have destroyed each other with love. So you chose to sacrifice it. Dmitri stopped just out of arm's reach, close enough that she could see the pain he was trying to hide. Again, no. Elena shook her head firmly. I chose to change it. There's a difference. She gestured to the ashes scattered around them, the evidence of their victory. Look around, Dmitri. We broke the pattern. You didn't lose control when I was threatened. You didn't slaughter innocence in your grief, and I'm not dead. But we're not. He stopped, unable to voice what they both felt. Connected, Elena finished. No, we're not, but we're free. Dmitri was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. Outside, Elena could hear sirens approaching, the human authorities drawn by the sounds of supernatural combat. Soon they would need to leave this place, return to a world that had no idea how close it had come to ancient horrors. I remember you, Dmitri said suddenly, from before the blood link. You were brave enough to hide a stranger in your car. You cared for me when I was nothing to you but a wounded man. He stepped closer, his hand rising as if to touch her face, then falling back to his side. Perhaps we can find each other again, without destiny's compulsion. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, tears that were purely her own, uncolored by his emotions. I'd like that, she admitted, though it might take time, learning to be just ourselves instead of halves of a whole. We have time, Dmitri said softly. For the first time in 400 years, we have nothing but time. Elena looked around the destroyed church, at the evidence of 13 lifetimes' worth of pain and loss finally laid to rest. The weight of those accumulated tragedies was gone, replaced by something lighter, but no less precious, possibility. Where do we go from here? She asked. Dmitri smiled then, the first genuine expression she'd seen from him since breaking the link. It was smaller than before, more uncertain, but entirely his own. Wherever we choose, he said. Together, if you'll have me. Apart, if that's what you need. But freely, Elena. Finally, we choose freely. The sirens were growing closer. Soon they would need to disappear into Prague's maze of ancient streets, to find whatever future awaited beyond the shadow of their cursed past. But for now, they stood in the ruins of destiny, 2 souls finally untethered from fate's design, learning to love without compulsion. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, the scent of coffee and fresh bread pulling her from dreamless sleep. For a moment she lay still in the narrow bed, adjusting to the peculiar lightness in her chest where the blood link had once hummed with constant connection. 3 months had passed since the church, and she still reached for Dmitri's presence each morning, only to find empty space. The small apartment Victor had arranged for her was nothing like her old studio, cleaner, warmer, with actual furniture instead of salvaged pieces. The Resistance had been generous with their gratitude, offering her a new identity and enough money to start over, but generosity couldn't fill the phantom ache where half her soul used to live. A soft knock interrupted her morning ritual of cataloguing what was missing. Elena padded to the door, already knowing who she'd find on the other side. Some things didn't require supernatural bonds to predict. Dmitri stood in the hallway holding 2 coffee cups and what appeared to be half a bakery's worth of pastries. His dark hair was shorter now, more modern, and he'd traded his aristocratic clothing for simple jeans and a sweater. The changes made him look younger, more human, though his ancient eyes remained unchanged. "Good morning," he said formally, as he had every morning for the past week. "I brought breakfast." "You don't need to keep doing this," Elena said, stepping aside to let him enter. It was the same conversation they'd had 6 times now, comfortable in its predictability. "I know." Dmitri arranged the pastries on her small table with careful precision. "I choose to." The word choose had become sacred between them, a reminder of their hard-won freedom. Every interaction was a deliberate decision rather than destiny's compulsion. Some days it felt like the most precious gift imaginable. Other days it felt like trying to build a cathedral with toothpicks. Elena curled into the chair across from him, cradling her coffee like a prayer. "How did you sleep?" "Poorly." Dmitri's honesty was another new development. Without the blood link to betray his emotions, he'd become almost aggressively truthful. "I dreamed about you again. Not the memories this time, just you, as you are now." Heat crept up Elena's neck. Their relationship had become something unprecedented, ancient beings learning to court like shy teenagers, mapping the boundaries between connection and independence. Some nights she ached to kiss him. Other nights his presence felt overwhelming. Too much history pressing against the present. "The resistance contacted me yesterday," Elena said, steering towards safer ground. "They want me to train new recruits. Apparently, my experience makes me valuable." Dmitri's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around his cup. "And I told them I'd consider it." Elena studied his face, reading the micro-expressions she'd learned to interpret without supernatural aid. It would mean traveling, being away for weeks at a time. "You should do what fulfills you," Dmitri said carefully. "You're not bound to anyone's expectations now." The words stung, despite his gentle tone. Elena set down her coffee with deliberate calm. "Is that what you think? That I stay in Prague out of obligation? Don't you?" The question emerged sharper than intended, revealing the uncertainty he tried so hard to hide. "Without the blood link, what reason do you have to remain near someone who's caused you so much pain?" Elena stared at him, seeing clearly the fear beneath his controlled exterior. 400 years of loving and losing had taught him to expect abandonment. Even freedom couldn't heal some wounds overnight. "You're an idiot," she said fondly. Dmitri blinked, clearly not the response he'd anticipated. "I beg your pardon?" "A brilliant, ancient, powerful idiot." Elena rose and moved around the table, stopping just beside his chair. "Do you know what I told the resistance?" He shook his head, dark eyes tracking her movement. "I said I'd train recruits here in Prague, that this city had become home in ways that had nothing to do with supernatural destiny." Elena reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and cupped his face in her hands. "I chose you, Dmitri. Not the blood link, not some cosmic design. You." His eyes fluttered closed at her touch, and Elena felt the phantom echo of their lost connection. Not the overwhelming flood of shared emotion, but something quieter, more deliberate. The choice to be vulnerable. "I'm terrified," he whispered against her palm. "Without the link, I don't know what you're feeling. I could hurt you, drive you away, and never realize until it's too late." "Then we'll have to use our words," Elena said, smiling at the revolutionary concept. "Like normal people." Dmitri's laugh was soft and slightly broken. "Normal is not something I've ever aspired to. Lucky for you, I'm not entirely normal either." Elena pressed her forehead to his, breathing in the familiar scent of midnight and old books. "We'll figure it out together. One choice at a time." Outside her window, Prague awakened to another ordinary day, its ancient streets holding space for both magic and mundane love stories. Elena closed her eyes and chose, once again, to stay. The new beginning. 6 months later, Elena stood in the Resistance's new Prague headquarters, watching a nervous young witch practice basic protective wards. The converted warehouse hummed with activity, dozens of supernatural beings learning to defend themselves, to fight back against those who would exploit them. It was everything Elena had imagined when she'd agreed to stay and train recruits. "Focus on your intention," she called out, her voice carrying the authority she'd never expected to possess. "The magic responds to your will, not your fear." The witch, barely 20, with power that crackled unpredictably around her fingers, nodded and tried again. This time, the ward held steady, shimmering gold in the afternoon light streaming through the skylights. "Better." Elena squeezed the girl's shoulder. "Practice that sequence until it's muscle memory. Your life may depend on it someday." As the training session wound down, Elena found herself checking the door for the third time in 10 minutes. Dmitri usually arrived by now, having finished his own work with the Resistance Council. He'd taken to mediating disputes between supernatural factions, his centuries of experience making him invaluable in negotiations. More importantly, it gave him purpose beyond protecting her. They lived separately still, Elena in her bright apartment, Dmitri in a renovated cellar beneath an antiquarian bookshop. But most evenings found them together, sharing dinner and conversation, building something entirely their own. It was slower than the instant intimacy the blood link had provided, but it was real in ways that supernatural compulsion could never be. "You're fidgeting," Victor observed, appearing beside her with that unsettling vampire silence. "Expecting someone?" Elena shot him a look. "Shouldn't you be terrorizing recruits somewhere?" "Already finished. The newest batch is promising. 3 witches, a shapeshifter, and something I'm not entirely sure how to classify." Victor studied her with ancient eyes. "You've done excellent work here, Elena. The resistance has never been stronger." The praise warmed her more than she expected. 6 months ago, she'd been a night janitor with no knowledge of the supernatural world. Now she was training the next generation of defenders, helping build something that might protect others from the kind of manipulation she'd endured. "It helps to have purpose," she admitted. "Something beyond destiny or prophecy." Victor nodded thoughtfully. "And Dmitri? How is he adjusting to normalcy?" Elena smiled at the question. Normal was relative when your lover was a 400-year-old vampire lord, but they'd found their rhythm. "He's learning. We both are." The warehouse door opened, bringing with it the sound of Prague's evening bustle and Dmitri's familiar silhouette. Elena's heart performed its usual flutter, a response that was entirely her own, uncolored by supernatural connection. 6 months, and she still felt that spark of joy at seeing him. "How was the council meeting?" she asked as he approached, noting the slight tension in his shoulders. "Productive. The European covens have agreed to share intelligence about Covenant movements." Dmitri's expression softened, as it always did when he looked at her. "How were your recruits? Getting stronger?" Maria finally managed a stable ward. They fell into step together as they left the warehouse, their conversation flowing with the easy rhythm they'd developed. No supernatural bond guided their words, no shared emotions smoothed over disagreements. They'd fought twice in the past month, real arguments that required actual communication to resolve. Elena treasured those fights almost as much as their reconciliations. They proved their relationship existed independent of cosmic manipulation. Outside, Prague's ancient streets glowed in the setting sun. The city had become truly home to Elena, its mixture of old and new reflecting her own transformation. She was no longer the frightened girl who'd hidden a bleeding stranger in her car, but she wasn't the mystically connected other half of an ancient soul either. She was